She was known among her peers as someone who preferred the quiet work. While others thrived on adrenaline-filled operations, she found satisfaction in routine tasks, like ensuring helicopters were refueled and ready before dawn. To most, it looked ordinary, yet to her, it was duty. She had joined the service not for glory, but for purpose, and every night she walked the flight line, checking hoses, gauges, and tanks with precision. It was in those simple tasks that she felt grounded. Fate would show her that even the most unassuming roles can turn into the center of unimaginable storms. The base sat in a volatile region, tucked near rugged terrain where cartel influence had seeped into every corner of life. Whispers of threats were common, though rarely materialized into direct confrontations. For her, it felt like background noise, something others worried about, but never reached her quiet corner of responsibility. She was the one who kept the helicopters flying, the silent support in operations. No one expected her to hold a weapon against impossible odds. She certainly didn't expect it either. But one night would transform her from a behind-the-scenes technician into the center of a standoff that would test the limits of human courage. It began with a strange stillness. The base usually hummed with radio chatter, boots moving across gravel, and the occasional roar of engines lifting into the sky. That evening, however, the night air carried a heaviness she couldn't explain. She finished topping off the last helicopter, wiping fuel from her gloves, when distant lights caught her attention. At first she thought they were headlights on the main road. Then she realized there were far too many. Streams of vehicles rolled toward the base, silent in formation, their numbers multiplying until the horizon seemed to pulse with them. At first, confusion spread among the few stationed at the outpost. Perhaps it was a convoy, perhaps reinforcements, but instinct told her otherwise. Shadows shifted beyond the wire, figures fanning out in organized silence. Radios crackled with uncertainty, voices rising as the realization sank. And this was no friendly approach. This was the cartel, and they hadn't come in dozens. They had come in hundreds. 300 armed men surrounded the base like a tightening noose. Trucks with mounted weapons pulled into position, their barrels glinting beneath moonlight. Men in masks, holding rifles, spilled across the terrain, each step calculated to send a message. The base was trapped. Panic threatened to overtake the small team inside. Calls for reinforcements went unanswered, communication lines jammed, radios buzzing uselessly. The few defenders knew they were cut off, outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. She was just a fuel specialist. She had never been trained for command, never briefed for such a siege. Yet as chaos erupted, as men shouted and scrambled, she felt a strange calm settle in. Fear clawed at her chest, but beneath it was clarity. Someone had to step forward. Someone had to decide what came next. And in that silence, eyes turned to her. Perhaps it was the steadiness in her expression, the way she stood unflinching while others wavered. Maybe it was that leadership often comes from the least expected place. But in that moment, she became the anchor. Her voice cut through the panic, sharp and clear, directing movement, assigning roles. Knew the helicopters were the base's lifeline. If they could not fly, escape was impossible. And if the fuel lines fell into enemy hands, they would be destroyed. Protecting them became her mission. As cartel gunmen closed in, she orchestrated defenses. Sandbags dragged into position, machine guns set on perches, rifles distributed among trembling hands. She assigned sectors of fire, turned mechanics into riflemen, cooks into lookouts. Every scrap of training she had absorbed over the years came rushing back, pieced together into a fragile defense. Yet she also knew the truth. 100 against less than 24 was no battle. It was a stand against time. The first shots rang out like thunderclaps. Tracers lit the night, bullets tearing into the wire. The ground shook as truck-mounted weapons fired, ripping holes through barriers. Dust and smoke filled the air. Through it all, she moved, unrelenting. She carried ammunition, shouted orders, reassured the terrified. When one of the defenders fell, she dragged him back under cover, blood soaking her sleeves. Every action stitched together a defense that by all logic, should have collapsed within minutes. The cartel expected quick surrender. Instead, they met ferocity. Helicopters fueled and ready became symbols of defiance, their silhouettes daring the attackers to destroy them. She positioned herself near them, rifle in hand, knowing that as long as those machines stood, hope stood. With them, her determination became infectious. Men who moments before had considered fleeing now fought with renewed resolve. Hours dragged on like years. The siege became a test of endurance, waves of assault crashing against their dwindling ammunition. She felt exhaustion clawed her bones, but she refused to falter. In lulls between gunfire, she ran calculations, rationing bullets, rotating fighters, tending to the wounded. She felt fear every second, yet she did not let it consume her. At dawn, the horizon burned with light, revealing the battlefield scarred with shell casings and craters. The cartel, frustrated by the unexpected resistance, prepared for one final push. She saw it in their movements, the way they gathered strength, determined to crush what little remained of the base's defenders. And in that moment, she made her choice. She ordered the last standing helicopter to lift, even as bullets riddled its frame. It rose into the air, carrying a signal flare of hope, proof that they had not been broken. Proof that reinforcements would know the base still stood. The cartel surged with fury, firing relentlessly at the rising aircraft. But the distraction gave her defenders one last chance to hold. Minutes felt like lifetimes until the distant thrum of approaching reinforcements echoed across the valley. Jets streaked overhead, ground forces converging, and suddenly the tide turned. The cartel scattered, unwilling to face superior firepower. Now that surprise was gone. Dust clouds marked their retreat, leaving behind silence and the acrid smell of spent gunpowder. When the reinforcements finally entered the battered base, they found her sitting on the fuel line she had sworn to protect. Weapon across her lap, eyes hollow with exhaustion, yet unbroken. Around her, survivors clung to life, because she had refused to let despair win. She was no longer just the woman who refueled helicopters. She was the one who had taken the lead when leadership was absent, who had turned fear into resistance, who had shown that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to surrender to it. In the weeks that followed, stories of that night spread far beyond the base. To some, she became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that heroes are often found in the quietest places. To others, she was proof that strength is not always measured by rank or training, but by the choice to stand firm when everything seems lost. And though she returned to her duties, once again walking the line with hoses and gauges in hand, she carried within her the memory of that night when 300 cartel members surrounded the base and she, against all reasons, stood tall.